Hey, I'm thinking about climate change today. Not the happiest topic in the world, but it's it's a very important one at the moment, and really should have been an important one for the last half a century. But for some reason, it takes that time for anyone to take any notice, especially on political matters. And science is a slow process. But it doesn't really seem like slowness is an option anymore, despite the fact that for many people there is doubt whether it's still real or not. I don't know, I felt compelled to talk about this today because I'm sat next to my riverbank again. And my riverbank is a lot smaller than it was last time I visited. Now, this is a normal thing, depending on rainfall, how hot it's been in Scotland, so it's never really that hot. But at the moment, there isn't much riverbank, and it just got me thinking about how I think people underestimate how much a relatively small change can have a big impact. We haven't really had any giant rainstorms, and yet here next to this river, it is very, very, very noticeable, that change. And yeah, when you put that into the context of the climate change, now I think climate crisis, and it's a term which a lot of people are using, 50 years of sitting around discussing things and not really getting any consensus is a long time. Maybe it's not a long time geologically speaking, but the fact that tangible change on a planetary scale has been noticeable within 50 years, within a lifetime, that's really quite scary, and yeah, we don't have a lot of time to sort it out. Now, at least in Europe, with what has now been a whole summer of really, really irrationally hot weather, not that noticeable in the UK, because we're in a spot where when much of Europe heats up, it cools down. But in Spain, in Greece, and a lot of the south and a lot of Central Europe, there have been these massive heat waves, and I think we've seen forest fires all across the world. But the thing which has really, really stood out to me recently has been, well, a news story which I saw today about the Arctic and how apparently current temperatures there are 39 degrees hotter than they should be at this time of the year. And now, yes, we're in one of these periods where the world is warmer than average, but 39 degrees is a terrifyingly big difference from an average. Now, I haven't seen the statistics, I don't know how much variance there actually is, but it seems very hard to believe that there would be any situation where the temperature there would be 39 degrees above whatever that average level is. That would be crazy to imagine. Now, it is summer, even in the Arctic, I guess, but that's huge, and something we should really, really be concerned about. Now, after literal decades of discussing whether or not it's real, for me this seems absurd because I've been brought up around climate scientists and biologists. So, climate change, the environment has always been in my sphere of knowledge. Although I'm not an expert, I've always had people around me who are. So to me, it's just absurd to think of it not being a thing. But that is still a genuine discussion in politics, in just general discussion. A lot of just normal people are still not convinced that it's real. But it's this year. I think it's got to a point that even politically speaking and in scientific circles, it's just beyond doubt. And yes, of course, there's also the discussion of, well, how much impact can it realistically have? Just the other day, there was something from Bill Gates saying that because of the technological advances in recent decades, we're never going to be in a disastrous situation. But then you have other commentators that are saying, no, our complete system is set up in such a way that we're just going to keep on digging the hole deeper. Even if we make improvements in technology, ultimately it's just going to be efficiency gains. And in the end, we're still going to just screw ourselves over and dig our own graves. But yeah, I think quite a lot of people will have seen that there was, within academia, within climate science circles, a paper was published recently, which was a call for climate scientists to stop doing climate science until there was a greater acknowledgement that something has to actually be done now politically. I guess the idea was climate scientists saying, we've done everything we can do. This goes to the politicians now. The evidence is clear, we've done our job. Can someone please do something about it now? That's quite a scary statement. You know, the scientists who have been giving us the information to try and inform a better approach to how we deal with climate change have given up. They've actually given up. And that's where we're at. And yes, some of the international organizations, their language is also changing. The IPCC, who's one of the major climate change international organizations, where they've been tentative in the past is no longer tentative. Their last report said very, very clearly that it's beyond doubt that climate change exists and we have to do something. You know, all throughout this video so far I keep on saying we have to do something, but there's not a consensus on what that something is. But it's clearly a massive problem, no one has the answers, and no one has the will to think big. Maybe because it's scary and no one knows what to do. Now, a big part of this last year for me was thinking about climate politics. I did a course in my university covering specifically climate politics, and even in that field, you know, the area which is trying to find the political solutions to climate change, most of the discussions were just problematizing the problem. You know, they were taking something that's already a giant issue and making it bigger. Now, this is important because the ways that climate change are going to affect people is going to differ widely, and thinking about how different groups are affected is very, very, very important. But there didn't seem to be like an academic movement within the social sciences that I found, at least, that was trying to work out those solutions. It was all about, here's a problem, let's make the problem bigger. I guess as such, I'm a culprit of that too. You know, I've just complained about the political scientists and social scientists who have spent all their time complaining. And what I've done is I've just made like a meta-complaint, where I've complained about the people who are complaining about nothing happening, and it's just a big chain of complaints. Now, smaller states, smaller countries, those are the area, and flat countries, those are the places that interest me the most when it comes to climate change, because those are the areas that are going to be immediately affected, and the Caribbean is one of those. Now, there's a movement, an initiative in the Caribbean with a rather scary name of 1.5 to stay alive. The principle being that a number of Caribbean states, if the global temperature rises by 1.5 degrees, then they're going to have so many issues that their islands are going to become inhospitable. Why is this an issue? Because this year it has become clear that there is no way of avoiding an increase in temperatures of 1.5 degrees. So what does that mean for this movement in the Caribbean? You have a movement claiming that after 1.5 degrees, their islands they can't live there anymore. And now it's pretty much certain that we will go over 1.5 degrees. Now, one of the nuances that have to be considered there is that 1.5 to stay alive slogan is a political slogan. It is based on rhetoric. It's not an absolute truth. You know, there are always going to be things you can do to mitigate, and mitigation is going to be a huge part of climate politics going forward. But one thing it does show is that we already have parts of the world which are at scary risk, even in the current situation that we have. And now in a world where there still isn't a political will to really do anything meaningful, plus there's a huge undercurrent in society that just does not believe that climate change exists, how do we help these countries that are already at risk? And then, it's not just small countries. I mean, the forest fires are a great example of that. Greece was affected. There was a huge heat wave in Spain, Canada, the US. In the Canada and US has forest fires quite a lot because they're getting worse. And they're going to become harder to handle. And then when we look at the solutions which are available, they tend to be financial based. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Finance has a role. The whole point of finance is that it enables bigger projects. It allows you to look into the future and effectively build into the future. That's a really, really clever human invention. It's just, it has to result in something. And we've reached a stage where a lot of these green finance methods are coming under doubt. And one of the key tenets of finance is that you have to trust it. It's based off trust. As soon as there's any doubt, the whole concepts of financial growth no longer work. That's how growth works in banks. The only reason that money in a bank is able to grow is because of trust in the banks. Trust that the deposits are going to keep on growing. Trust that your money is still going to be in there when you come to withdraw it. Investment, same idea. There's the trust that if you invest in something in the future, what you've invested is going to be worth more. So your money becomes worth more as well. So if the biggest advances we've had politically and technologically for climate mitigation have been financial, and trust is lost in those financial methods, that's a bit of a disaster, and that has to change. And there are more radical ideas out there away from things like these financial measures, these market-led green political measures. I wrote my dissertation this year on this idea of a steady state economy, which could be market-led, but is likely not to be. This idea, basically the idea in a lot of the more radical climate responses, is that the key issue. Sorry, I'm just adjusting the camera. The key issue, the key driver of climate change is our economic system. Now, I want solutions to work within the current economic system, but when you look at things like these green financial structures not working yet, they do start to point at some of the issues. I do personally believe that overconsumption is one of the key issues, but our current system demands that we consume as much as possible because that is where growth comes from. And yes, there are arguments that we can reduce the material burden of that by swapping over more to services, like the consumption of ideas, but there's always going to be industries which are more materially driven. Even if you try and reduce that, we still need food, we still need transport, we still need infrastructure, we still need housing. And if you were in a situation where you were able to find ways of reducing the consumption of those things, then their position within the economy is going to become weaker. And then there's going to be, if you think in terms of the current system, then there's going to be less investment in them. And then there's going to be less sustainability for those industries. So there's going to be an issue looking forwards if we're to go for a market-led response to climate and it works. But then a move away from that will demand a complete transformation of how society is organized. I think sometimes it's easy to underestimate just how much of our lives is organized by our economic system. The way that governments work is governed by our economic system in many ways. The way we think, the way we go to work, why we go to work, what our aims in life are really, really dramatically influenced by whatever economic system we have in place. Maybe we don't think about that because I think the majority of people will have only lived in this capitalist society which we live in. There's a small number of people will have lived in communist states as well, but the number of people that have experienced that is dissipating. And then other economic systems. I don't think anyone really has been living under a feudal system for hundreds of years. I could be wrong, but it's very hard to imagine anything else. Is it the quite controversial philosopher Zizek? I think that's how you say his name. It says it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I'm not taking an anti-capitalist stance here, but that is something which is really poignant to think about. If we need to completely transform our economic system, we don't seem to be able to get out of that rut. If we need to move away from a system which is currently driving the climate crisis, what do we do about that? From my perspective, I mean, overconsumption is at the heart of it. Overconsumption can mean not just like food and the material things that we come across each day, my fancy headphones and my fancy coat and my nice glasses, but also less tangible energy. It's like trying to move away from oil, for example. Oil effectively represents energy in many ways, although it also feeds into plastics, etc. And then there's the logistical chains that support that. Consumption is more complex than just the material things that we wear and live in and eat. And I think part of the solution is going to be, like on a global scale, learning to live with less. But that's also very, very difficult to imagine, because in different countries, what is considered less is going to differ. What's going to be considered a sufficient amount is going to differ. Like here in the UK, a lot of people are going to struggle with the idea of not using cars all the time, for example. Whereas in some countries, sufficient might look like having a meal on a table and having a roof over your head. So finding the balance there politically is going to be extremely difficult. Knowing what a sufficient livelihood looks like, and then trying to persuade people that that is a good idea. I don't know. We're talking about the biggest challenge of our times. I don't know how to close, so I'm just gonna close in that way.